The morning Honora Wren turned 1 and 20. She stood at the foot of the great stone steps of Marlcombe Hall, with a single traveling case at her feet, and watched the household she had been born into pretend it had never known her name. Rain had fallen in the night, and the steps held a thin gray shine. She had walked the last 2 miles from the coaching inn because there had been no carriage sent, and her hem was heavy with road water, and the case had grown heavier with each field, and still she had come, because the date written on the deed her father left her had at last arrived, and she meant to claim what the date allowed. Above her in the doorway, a footman she had once shared bread with looked through her as though she were a tradesman come to the wrong entrance. A second man stood farther back in the hall's shadow, very still, his coat, the deep navy of a riding habit not yet changed, and he did not look through her at all. He looked at her with the particular attention a man gives a thing he has been told is one thing, and suspects is another. "Send the girl round to the kitchen door," came a woman's voice from inside. Smooth and unhurried, the voice of someone who had never once been made to wait. "Whoever she is not received at the front." To the house that morning, Honora was a beggar in a wet gown. They had decided it before she reached the gate. Stay with me a moment, because the world is about to be told it has made a mistake, and there is a particular pleasure in watching the world find out. She did not yet know who the still man in the doorway was. She knew only that her father's seal was in her glove, and that she had come a long way to put it down on a table these people believed was theirs. Her father had been Edmund Wren, a merchant who had made a modest fortune in wool, and a wiser one in patience, and who had married late and happily the youngest daughter of a viscount whose family had spent its consequence faster than its coin. When her mother died, Honora was 9. When her father died, she was 16, and the will that should have placed her under the guardianship of her mother's brother had instead, through a clause her father trusted and her relations exploited, placed her fortune in trust, and her person in the keeping of the Marlcombe family until she should come of age. £3,000 a year. The hall itself, which her father had purchased outright in the last good year of his life, and intended as her dowry and her home, a set of fields, a mill, a name on a deed. All of it held, the lawyer said, in careful stewardship until her 1 and 20th birthday, when it would pass entire into her hands. For 5 years, she had not been kept. She had been disposed of. The Marlcombe family, distant cousins of her mother who had attached themselves to the estate the moment the trust gave them the keys, had sent her at first to a school in the north that took girls and forgot them, and then, when the school's fees grew inconvenient, to the household of an acquaintance as a kind of unpaid companion, neither servant nor guest. A girl who answered bells and was grateful. They wrote to her twice a year. They told her the estate was a burden they bore for her sake. When she asked after the accounts, they told her that such things were not a young woman's concern, and that she would understand when she was older how much they had spared her. The dowager who ruled Marlcombe Hall was Lady Castleridge, born Augusta Marlcombe, a woman of 60 whose late husband had been a baronet, and whose late husband's title had died with him, leaving her with the manners of rank and none of its security. She had moved into the hall as a temporary measure in the first winter after Edmund's death, and had never once treated the arrangement as temporary again. She had hung her own portraits. She had renamed the Rose Garden. She had, by the slow theft that requires no locksmith, made the place hers in every way but the one that mattered, which was the deed. And the deed she could not touch until she could persuade the law that the girl it named did not exist, was not fit, or would not come. The girl had come. Honora climbed the steps because no one had told her she might. And that was the first sentence she had spoken to herself in 5 years, that her body had obeyed without flinching. The footman stepped to bar the door, and then did not, because the still man in the navy coat had moved at last one quiet stride, and placed himself in the space the footman meant to fill. He was perhaps 34. He was tall, with the kind of breadth that does not announce itself, dark hair cut close, a jaw held level, and gray eyes that had the cool of slate after rain. He looked at her wet hem and her heavy case and her gloved hand, pressed flat against her ribs where the seal was, and something moved behind his face that he did not let reach it. "You will let her in," he said. He did not raise his voice. He did not need to. Lady Castleridge came into the hall then, and her step checked when she saw who had spoken. "Your Grace," she said, recovering, the warmth arriving in her voice a half-second after the calculation that summoned it. "You are too good. There is no need, however, to trouble yourself with a creature off the road. The parish handles such cases. I will have her seen to." The man she called Your Grace did not look at her. He was looking at Honora still. "What is your name?" he said. And it was not quite a question, because he had already begun, somewhere behind the slate, to suspect the answer. "My name is Honora," she said. Her voice came out steadier than she had any right to expect. "My father was Edmund, the merchant who bought this house. As of this morning, it is mine." The hall went very quiet. A maid on the stair stopped with a folded cloth in her hands. Lady Castleridge's fan, which had been moving, stilled at a height precisely calculated to convey that nothing of consequence had been said. And the Duke, for he was the Duke of Aldermere, whose lands ran beside Marlcombe, and who had ridden over that morning on a matter of fences, and stayed for a matter that had nothing to do with fences at all, said nothing at all for the length of 3 breaths, and then he turned to the footman and said, "Bring her case inside. She is cold." It was a small thing. It was an order about luggage. And yet, Honora felt it land in her chest, like warmth pressed to a frozen hand, and she did not understand why, and she distrusted it at once, because she had learned that kindness from those above her was usually the first move of a longer cruelty. She had been a girl whom no one chose. That was the message 5 years had pressed into her, gently, relentlessly, the way water shapes stone. No one will come for you. No one will want the trouble of you. You are a problem. Your betters are too courteous to name aloud. She did not know that the Duke of Aldermere had spent the last 3 years learning, in a harder school than hers, exactly what it cost to look at a person in need and decide the trouble was too great. Lady Castleridge played the only hand she had, which was confidence, and she played it well. She installed Honora in a small, cold room in the east wing that had once been a nursery, told the staff the girl was a distant connection in reduced circumstances who had appealed to the family's charity, and set about the work of making the truth unspeakable. She was not cruel in any way a witness could later swear to. She was worse than cruel. She was plausible. At dinner that first evening, with the Duke staying as her guest because the rain had not let up and the roads were poor, she spoke of Honora across the table as one speaks of a charity case whose feelings are not quite real. "The poor thing has a fixed idea," she said, to the polished length of the table, to the Duke and to her granddaughter who had arrived that afternoon. "She believes herself the heiress of all this. It is a sad delusion, and we humor it. The mind, when it has nothing, invents an inheritance. The granddaughter was Miss Selina Castleridge, 22, golden-haired, dressed in a gown the color of ice over water, and brought to Marlcombe with a purpose her grandmother had not bothered to disguise from anyone but its object." She laughed, a soft, pretty sound. "How affecting," she said. "And does she believe the Duke is to marry her too?" Honora set down her fork. She had eaten almost nothing. Across the table the Duke had gone, still in the particular way she would come to know, the stillness of a man holding something level that wanted to tip. "I make no claim to his grace," Honora said evenly. "I make a claim to my father's deed. The two are not connected, and I would thank Miss Castleridge not to connect them." "There!" said Lady Castleridge, satisfied, as though the girl had proved her point. "You see how she runs on." The Duke, though, had heard something else. He had heard a woman correct a slander without raising her voice, decline a fortune she might have been forgiven for grasping at, and draw a line between her dignity and her need with a precision that the diamonds at the table could not match. He looked at Honora for a moment too long, and then he looked at his plate. And Lady Castleridge, watching him the way a hawk watches a field, saw the look and mislabeled it, because her categories did not contain the possibility that a duke might prefer the substance of a person to the polish of one. The witnessing came the following morning, and the duke saw it, though Honora believed herself alone. A scullery girl of perhaps 10, new to the house and frightened of it, had dropped a tray of breakfast china on the stone of the back passage, and Lady Castleridge's housekeeper had the child by the ear and a list of the breakages on her tongue, each piece named with its cost, the sum mounting past anything the girl could earn in a year. Honora, passing with a basket of mending she had taken up unasked, because idleness in that house felt like an accusation, stopped. She did not scold the housekeeper, who outranked her in the only currency the house recognized. She knelt instead on the cold stone in her plain gown, and began to gather the broken pieces into her apron, and she said, in a voice pitched for the child and not for the woman, that she had broken a whole service once, at 16, and survived it, and that china was only earth that had been to the fire and back, and could not be worth more than a living girl's ear. She pressed 2 of her 11 shillings into the child's palm, folded the small fingers over them, and told the housekeeper that she would answer for the breakage herself, and that the matter was closed. The duke stood at the turn of the passage where neither of them could see him, and he did not move, and what crossed his face was the look of a man who has been shown, without being asked to admire it, the precise quality he had spent 3 years failing to find in a single drawing-room of polished daughters. He went out to the stables and did not speak of it. He did not need to. He had seen her when she thought no one, whose opinion could cost or save her, was watching, and the seeing settled something in him that argument never could have. That night Honora could not sleep in the cold nursery, and she went down through the dark house to the library, because in the worst years she had taught herself that books did not care what you were called. The fire was banked but living, and the duke was there, in a chair by the hearth, a glass untouched at his elbow, and a small object in his hand that he was turning over and over with his thumb. He did not startle when she entered. He simply closed his hand around the object and looked at her. "You should be asleep," he said. "So should you, your grace." A breath that was almost, not quite, a laugh. "I do not sleep well in this house," he said. "It is not mine. There is a particular discomfort in a house that belongs to no one who lives in it." He was quiet a moment. "You knew it as a child." "I was born in the blue room," Honora said. "My mother chose the paper. It is gone now. They have papered over it." She had not meant to say that. It had come out of her like blood from a pressed wound. He turned the small object once more, and then, deliberately, he opened his hand so she could see it. A miniature, old, the gilt, worn at the edges, the painted face inside a young woman with dark hair and a serious mouth. "My sister," he said. "She married a man I did not trust. I told her I would not receive her until she left him. I was protecting her, I thought. I was managing her. She died of a fever in a house I had refused to enter, and I learned of it 4 days after, by letter." He closed his hand again. "I have learned to mistrust the part of myself that decides what is best for people who have not asked me to decide it." He looked at her. "Your relations have decided what is best for you for 5 years. I find I cannot watch it with comfort." It was the most he would say of his wound for a long while, and he said it once, and never explained it again. The miniature, though, went back into his breast pocket, and Honora noticed in the days that followed how often his hand moved to that pocket when the dowager spoke over her, as though he were holding something there steady. The eviction, when it came, was dressed as concern. Lady Castleridge had consulted, she said, a solicitor of her own, who had grave doubts about the validity of the deed the girl carried, doubts that would require months of inquiry, during which it was clearly improper for the girl to remain at the Hall, trading on a claim not yet proved. Honora was to be removed to the village to lodgings the family would generously fund, until the matter was resolved. It was a masterstroke. It put her off the land, broke her possession of it, and bought the dowager the months she needed to find or forge the instrument that would unmake the deed entirely. What the dowager did not know was that Honora had spent 2 of her 5 lost years as the unpaid companion of an elderly woman whose son was a clerk in Chancery, and that the girl who answered bells had also read by candle every paper that crossed that house, and understood trusts and deeds and the precise difference between possession and right rather better than Lady Castlereagh supposed. Honora did not argue. She asked, mildly, whether she might have the use of the morning room for an hour to write some letters before she went. The Dowager, gracious in victory, allowed it. The Duke saw the trap close. He had ridden back to his own seat 2 days before, on the fence business that had become a pretext he no longer troubled to maintain, and he returned to Marlcombe the morning of the removal to find a post-chaise at the door, and Honora's traveling case once more at the foot of the steps where he had first seen it. The symmetry of it stopped him on the gravel. He found her in the morning room, sealing a letter, calm as still water, and he said the second of the commands she would remember. "Do not get into that carriage." She looked up. "Your Grace, I have no standing to refuse it. They fund my lodging. I have 11 shillings of my own." "You have a deed," he said. "A deed they will tie up for a year. I cannot fight a year in the village on 11 shillings. She said it without self-pity, as a sum, a fact, a thing she had already costed. "I have written to my father's solicitor in London. He is honest, and he is slow. By the time he comes, the field will be lost. Possession is the whole game, and they know it. I am to be moved off the board this morning, so the board can be reset." The Duke crossed the room. He did not touch her. He stopped at a distance that propriety could have measured with a ruler, and Honora felt the air change as though a fire had been carried into it, felt her own pulse jump at her throat in a way she despised, because her body had decided something her mind had refused for days to permit. He was looking at her mouth and then her eyes, and the slate had gone out of his, left something else. "There is a way you remain at Marlcombe with standing. They cannot question," he said low. "It is not a small thing to offer, and it is a worse thing to ask. Even so, I find I would rather ask it badly than watch you driven off your own land." He paused. The whole house seemed to lean toward the pause. "Marry me." "Not for the deed. The deed is yours, regardless, and I will see it. So, marry me because a duchess is not put in a post-chaise by a baronet's widow, and because I have spent 3 years learning what it costs to stand at a distance from someone who needs you, and I will not learn it again." It was not a paragraph. It was the most he had ever said at once, and his voice was not steady at the end of it, and that unsteadiness undid her more than any smoothness could have. Want. She heard it in him, naked under the practicality, and she felt it answer in herself, the pull that had no rational name, the awareness of exactly where in the room he stood that had haunted her since the first morning. She wanted to say yes, the way one wants to step toward warmth in deep cold, and she made herself stop, because she had one thing left that was wholly hers, and it was the refusal to be saved as an act of charity. "I will not be your good deed," she said. Her hand had risen to the place at her ribs, where no seal now sat, an old gesture emptied. "I have been a duty to people for 5 years. I would rather lose the field than become a duty to you." He heard the line under the line. He understood, in the way she was beginning to trust he always did, that she had not refused him. She had refused to be pitied. And he did the thing that no one in 5 years had done. He did not argue her out of her dignity. He inclined his head, accepted the no, and said only, "Then keep the field by your own hand, and I will stand where you tell me to stand, and nowhere else." He stepped back. The distance returned. Yet something had been said in the small room that could not be unsaid, and they both carried it out of the room like a coal in a closed fist. She did not get into the carriage. She walked to the village on her own feet, with her own case, and took the meanest room the inn afforded, a low chamber over the tap room where the smell of ale came up through the boards, and the single window gave onto a stable yard. From there, over 11 days, she did the patient, unglamorous work that her lost years had taught her. The first day she walked to the parish church and found the register that recorded her baptism in the blue room, and the vicar, an old man who had buried her father, remembered the christening in the green paper and wept a little to see her grown, and copied out the entry in his own hand, and signed it, and pressed his seal to it without being asked. The third day she found the steward, Mr. Reber. Harlow dismissed 2 winters past for asking the wrong questions, now keeping his sister's accounts in a cottage at the edge of the parish, and he sat her at his table and told her his hands flat on the wood to stop them shaking, where the true estate accounts had been moved when the dowager replaced him, and that he had kept his own quiet copy of every quarter he served, because a man dismissed for honesty learns to hold his proof. He gave her the ledger. He asked nothing for it but that she remember he had not stolen, that he had been the one man in that house who would not. The 7th day she wrote to the chancery clerk, Mr. Brest Pell, the son of the woman whose bells she had answered, and on the 10th his reply came back with the one fact that turned the whole matter, which was that the solicitor, Lady Castlerge, had engaged to dispute the deed, was the same man who had drawn the trust, and a man cannot in law unmake the instrument he himself made valid. The dowager had hired, in her confidence, the one person whose involvement proved the deed beyond dispute. Honora read the letter twice in the gray light of the stable-yard window, and then she folded it. And her hands were steady, and she understood that the months Lady Castleridge had bought to find a weapon had instead handed her one. The Duke did not rescue her. This is the part the world that watches such stories most needs to hear, so I will say it plainly, and then return to the snow that was beginning, that 11th evening. To fall, he sent no money. He fought no battle on her behalf. He did exactly what she had asked, which was to stand where she told him to stand, and what she told him, in a brief and formal note delivered by the inn's boy, ran so. Be present, Your Grace, at the assembly at Marlcombe on the night of the Castleridge ball, and bring your solicitor, and say nothing until I have finished, and then say one true thing if you find you wish to. The dowager had planned the ball as a coronation. Selina was to be presented to the county as the future of Marlcombe. The engagement to be implied was the dowager's, between her granddaughter and the land she had spent 5 years arranging to keep, and the troublesome girl, safely lodged in the village on the family's charity, was to be a story told with a sigh over the punch. The ballroom blazed. 300 candles, an orchestra at the far end, the terrace doors open to a cold, clear night, the marble floor reflecting silk and diamond, and the particular self-satisfaction of people certain of their place. Lady Castleridge stood near the head of the room in grey and silver, her fan held at the measured height that meant all was well. And beside her Selina shone in ice blue, and the county turned its 300 faces toward them and approved. Into that room at 9:30 walked Honora in the plain cream gown she had worn the day she arrived, cleaned and pressed by her own hands, with no jewel at her throat, and the parish register, and the steward's ledger, and the chancery clerk's letter in a flat leather case. She had not been invited. The footman at the door was the same one who had looked through her on the steps, and his face, when he saw her, did a complicated thing. He let her pass. Perhaps because the Duke of Aldermere was 3 steps behind her in black and white, with a sober man in spectacles at his shoulder, and a footman who bars a duke makes a decision above his station. Perhaps for an older reason. Perhaps because she had shared bread with him once and he had not forgotten it as thoroughly as he had pretended. The room noticed her by degrees, the way a pond notices a stone. Conversation thinned. The orchestra played on into a silence that was spreading under it. Lady Castleridge saw her, last because she had been smiling at a peer, and when she turned and found the girl standing in the center of the floor with a leather case under her arm, the dowager's fan dropped a full inch before she caught it. "She is not received here," Lady Castleridge said to the room now, her voice rising past its usual register for the first time. "This is the delusion I spoke of, some poor companion off the road who fancies herself an heiress. Will someone of sense remove her?" There it was the 3rd time, the same misreading worn smooth by 5 years of use, spoken now not as a private aside or a dinner-table cruelty, but as a public verdict, in the very arena where the dowager had ruled. And Honora, in the silence, set her leather case on the long table beneath the windows, and opened it, and did not raise her voice at all. "I am Honora Wren," she said. "Daughter of Edmund Wren, who bought this house in the year of his death, and left it to me, by a deed that took effect on my 21st birthday, which was the 17th morning past, the morning I was turned to the kitchen door of my own home." She lifted the parish register. "I was baptized in the blue room that has since been papered over. The record is here, in the hand of a vicar still living, who will attend any inquiry the law cares to make." She set it down. She lifted the ledger. "These are the true accounts of this estate for the last 5 years kept by the steward this household dismissed for honesty, showing where its 3,000 a year was spent and on whom." She set it down. She lifted the letter. "And this is from the chancery clerk who has examined the trust. The solicitor, Lady Castleridge, engaged to overturn my deed, is the man who drew it. He cannot break what his own oath made sound. There is no doubt in this matter. There has never been any doubt. There has only been a delay you all agreed to call kindness. No one spoke." Selina's painted smile had gone somewhere. Her face could not follow it. Lady Castleridge had both hands on her fan now, and the fan was not moving, and neither was she. It was then that the Duke of Aldermere crossed the room. He did it in the manner the niche of his rank permitted, unhurried, 3 long strides that the whole silent room counted. And he stopped at Honora's side. Not in front of her, beside her. And he turned to face the county that had been so certain, and he said the one true thing. She had told him he might say if he wished to. And he found that he wished to more than he had ever wished anything. "This is my betrothed, and this is her house." The line was not poetry. It claimed a name and an engagement and a deed in 8 plain words. And it could not be taken back, and it ended in that room, the hold these people had kept on her for 5 years. The silence, after it held for a long moment, the way the air holds after a bell. Then it broke, not into uproar, but into the small particular sounds of a verdict, reversing the peer Lady Castleridge had been charming, turning his shoulder a careful degree away from her. A matron who had sighed over the poor companion now examining her own gloves. The steward brought, as a witness, and standing by the door, lifting his chin, for the first time in 2 years. The solicitor in spectacles stepped forward and said, in the dry voice of a man who deals only in instruments, that he had reviewed the deed, and the trust and the clerk's letter, and found the lady's title to Marlcombe entire and unencumbered, and that any party disputing it should be advised of the cost of doing so. That was the procedural seal, and the dowager heard it for what it was. Lady Castleridge did not rage. The niche of such women is not rage. It is the slow collapse of a confidence that has never before failed. "I kept this house," she said, and her voice had lost its smooth height and come down to something almost human. "I kept it in good order. I did not let it fall to ruin while a child grew up. Someone had to." It was not an apology. It was nearer to a defense, and nearer still to the first true thing she had said in the room, and Honora, who might have been forgiven a moment of triumph, did not take it. "You kept it," Honora said. "You will be thanked for the roses. The accounts will be examined fairly, and what was spent in good faith will be called good faith." She paused. "But you will not stand at the head of my drawing room again, and Selina will not be presented as the heir of a house that was never hers to give. That part is over. It was the calibrated displacement and not 1 degree past it. The dowager was corrected, not destroyed. She was given the roses, and refused the throne. Selina, who had spent 22 years being told she was the correct choice, and had never until this evening been refused, put her gloved hand to her mouth, and discovered that the room which had arranged itself around her an hour before had quietly rearranged itself around the woman in the plain cream gown, and that this is how the world moves. All at once, and without a sound, Gwennet decides, at last, to see. The snow that had begun 11 evenings before in the village fell again that night over Marlcombe, and it was falling still a fortnight later, soft and unhurried, against the windows of the blue room where the old paper had been stripped away in a single afternoon to find, beneath the dowager's gray, a few surviving inches of the pattern Honora's mother had chosen. Faded green leaves on a cream ground, the color of a thing remembered rather than seen. They had not papered the whole room again. Honora had asked that the surviving patch be left, framed in plain molding, a window into the wall, and the rest left bare and waiting, because some things are better restored slowly by the hand that owns them than quickly by the hand that pays. The Duke of Aldermere stood at that window in the early dark with his coat off and the fire high, and Honora came to stand beside him. And for a while neither of them said anything, because they had learned that the best of what passed between them lived in the space where words were not required. His hand moved to his breast pocket, the old gesture, and this time he drew the miniature out and set it on the mantel, upright, where it could see the room, the painted, serious face of a sister he had failed, turned at last toward a house where he had not stood at a distance. He had told Honora once, in the library, that he mistrusted the part of himself that decided what was best for others. He had, this once, decided nothing for her. He had stood where she told him to stand and said one true thing when she gave him leave, and it had been enough, and the enough of it sat in his chest like a debt he had not known he could pay. "My sister would have liked you," he said. She had no patience for people who told her what she could not have. Honora reached out and touched the worn gilt edge of the small frame, the dark hair, the serious mouth so like his own. "Then we shall keep her where she can watch us be happy," she said. "She has earned the view." Outside, the snow filled the old garden the dowager had renamed, and Honora had not yet troubled to rename. Back, lying soft over the rose beds, over the gravel where a traveling case had twice been set down, over the long drive she had walked alone on a wet morning that already seemed to belong to another woman's life. The village lay quiet beyond the trees, the inn with its low chamber over the tap-room dark. Now the church where an old vicar had wept and copied an entry in his own hand, shuddered against the cold. The cottage where a dismissed steward kept his sister's accounts showing one lit window. All of them had given her something, and none of them had been asked to. And she thought she would find a way in the spring to thank each of them in turn. Inside, the fire moved on the framed patch of her mother's wall, the green leaves catching and losing the light, and the miniature kept its small, steady watch from the mantel. And the man who had learned at terrible cost to stand only where he was asked, stood now exactly where he was wanted, which was beside her and would, by every quiet sign she had learned to read in him, stand there for the rest of their lives. She had come of age on their doorstep with 11 shillings and a deed, and the whole world's verdict against her. She had gone to bed that night, the mistress of her father's house, the wife-to-be of a man who had let her win her own battle, and loved her the more for it, and the keeper of a small painted woman who would never again be left outside in the cold. War. The blue room held the last of the light. The snow did not stop. She was home. Thank you for staying to the end of her story. If a moment of it stayed with you, I would be glad to know which one.